Welcome to another character profile. And now I'm finally tackling a topic I've long gotten requests, and the reason I hadn't done it before was because it's something I watched and enjoyed when I was very young, but haven't paid much attention to in probably 15 years. That's Thomas the Tank Engine, a franchise that started off as a series of children's books and has since blossomed into a massive million-dollar franchise, and one with a surprisingly sizable adult fan base. For this profile, I decided to look at it from the point of view of somebody who has not devoured anything Thomas-related in many a moon, rather than as a super mega expert. Thus, I'll actually be learning things I didn't know about the series right along with you. So with that said, let's begin with the history of how it began. The idea for the land of Sodor began when Christopher, the son of Reverend Wilbert Awdry, was hit with the measles, and being a train enthusiast, he created a story about a blue engine named Edward, followed by another about Gordon, the big engine. Britt Allcroft became interested in adapting the Railway series books to television. Now, back in the 1950s, there was an attempt by the BBC to transfer them to television, which resulted in a single, apparently disastrous episode. In 1984, Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends premiered on ITV. Allcroft decided to use electric trains with changeable faces between shots and riding along model sets. Now, before I embarked on preparing this video, I had not seen the series in many years, so I had no idea how I would feel about the show now, even though I did enjoy it as a child. And you know what? I think it holds up. It's no secret that I have very high standards for children's programming, and I hate shows that feel the need to pander or look down at children. They're a lot smarter than people realize, and thankfully Britt Allcroft has enough respect for children to treat them with some dignity. The first of these Railway series books was published in 1945, with Henry being added to the mix. Believe it or not, Thomas was not even introduced until the second book. Throughout the years, Awdry would continue to expand the land of Sodor and add more talking engines and other vehicles until he retired in 1972. And then, in 1983, Christopher took over writing the books. Most of us seem to remember Thomas the Tank Engine as that cute little show of the little train happily going around and puffing and doing various train-related activities. However, I was genuinely surprised by how much of a personality Thomas has. He does have tempers, he does become full of himself in a number of episodes, and he gets into arguments with his fellow trains. Thomas has dimension. A number of episodes I watch tend to involve Thomas thinking he's invincible, and even disobeys the train station director at times, with the episodes then having him learn a lesson in the end. There are consequences to his actions, but the scripts deliver them in a way that does not hammer the message into the viewer's head. And this applies to the other engines as well. There are also legitimate stakes in the series. There's always the threat of one of the trains spiraling off course and harming people. Allcroft never shied away from taking the stories in this direction, and I imagine that's a large reason why it's been able to attain an audience above the expected 5-year-old demographic. I also admire that despite each story being about 5 minutes long, there's a definite beginning, middle, and end, and a decent story structure. I'm impressed with how much they managed to pack into a short running time. I also have to give praise to the model work. The sets have an old-fashioned English countryside feel to them, and the train models are exceptionally well done. One point of criticism for some is that the mouths don't move, and you could argue it's a cost-cutting measure, but it really does not bother me. Considering these are based on storybooks, I imagine we're meant to see these as brightly colored illustrations being read to us, and the characters well written enough and the voices appealing that it never becomes a bother, to me anyway. When Thomas the Tank Engine made its way to North America in 1989, Shining Time Station was created to showcase the segments as it detailed a train station and the various wacky things that happened there. And it was really cheesy, with children underacting and adults overacting. The stories were very silly too, and the insertion of the Thomas segments come across as very forced. Originally, Ringo Starr played the storytelling magical conductor, but I think most people, including myself, remember George Carlin in the role, and he was actually fairly decent. Though once you find out about Carlin's other work, it is kind of humorous seeing him play a character who would not even think of saying his stand-up material. I understand why they felt the need to create this series, but I think Thomas and Friends works better by itself. With the popularity of Thomas, a feature film was released in 2000 called Thomas and the Magic Railroad, which was partly inspired by a letter written to Britt Allcroft by a young girl who wanted Thomas to visit her. A lot of it is what you would expect from a Thomas the Tank Engine movie. It mainly revolves around the conductor slowly losing the power of his magical gold dust and him trying to retrieve it, while him and Thomas try to stop the evil Diesel. Again, the model work is nicely done, and Alec Baldwin looks like he's having a ball of a time as Mr. Conductor. There are some genuine stakes in the story, particularly when Diesel shows up. My biggest question is where all the people are. In the original series, Sodor is filled with folks either catching the train or doing their jobs. But only the conductor and his cousin are hanging about in Sodor, with the station director, Sir Topham Hatt, being off screen and only conversing with the characters by telephone. It's a cute little adventure with Thomas and the rest of the trains being their usual likable selves. When the movie's in Sodor. For some reason, an independent drama with Mara Wilson playing a girl trying to reconnect with her grandfather who's sad that his train stopped working keeps barging into the film. Or at least that's what it feels like. Every time the film cuts to the real world, it takes a rather dour and boring turn. It's certainly not helped by Peter Fonda's mopey performance. I understand his character is supposed to be sad, but wow, Fonda's character feels like he should go see his doctor about some antidepressants. It really feels like it belongs in a completely different film. So when Wilson and Fonda end up in Sodor in the third act, it actually feels very jarring. Again, I think it's a reasonably harmless and okay children's picture throughout most of the runtime, but those scenes in Shining Time and the real world just don't fit at all. Apparently, Britt Allcroft had a longer director's cut that provided much better context for why Mara Wilson goes to Shining Station and why Peter Fonda really is that sad about his beloved train, but the studio forced her to take out a number of scenes. There was even another villain that was completely removed from the final cut and who made the film a lot more coherent, and to Thomas fans, this is their holy grail. And there was quite a bit of buzz when footage from that version leaked out onto the internet. So for both the fans and Allcroft's sake, I hope you one day get to see the full director's cut. After Britt Allcroft left the franchise following the release of Thomas and the Magic Railroad, Thomas kept chugging along, and not surprisingly was made into a fully computer-animated series. As much as I like the models, I understand why they would gravitate in this direction, and while the stories are more simplistic in this incarnation, I think it looks fine. The big thing is that the train's faces now move, and considering the animators don't have much space to make them too expressive, it looks decent enough. The people attack wood in the animation, but I think that's in keeping with how they were in the original series. I do agree with the consensus that the original Allcroft episodes were better, but I think these new CG episodes are solid little Thomas stories. One element I also have to praise the Thomas the Tank Engine series for is the toy line. It was a natural fit to make toys out of, and they did a fantastic job of transferring them into actual little trains. While I don't think I ever had any Thomas toys, as in the end I always gravitated towards Lego, I remember one of the joys when I was very, very young, when going to the toy shop, was playing on the tabletop with the Thomas set. I think also worth commending is the franchise's role in train preservation. Wilbert Awdry took a lot of inspiration from real stories of what was happening in the railways when writing the books, and used that as an opportunity to promote the trains and make sure they're kept preserved for future generations. And it was through making a documentary on one of those heritage railways that Britt Allcroft first found out about the Thomas books. In conclusion, this has been quite a fun trip through memory lane, and looking the history of Thomas the Tank Engine and revisiting it has given me a better understanding of why it's attained such a dedicated and loyal fan base over the years. See you next time.